So I did my research on violent video games. Technology plays a big part in our society, impacting our daily lives immensely. At young ages, kids are immediately given some variety of technology. With such quick access to these resources, it's so easy to be able to look at mature content, like varied levels of violence, which would not have been accessible without technology. Over and over, this content is offered through trending video games. Even though enjoyment comes from these violent video games, kids are exposed to completely different degrees of violence that could presumably impact their motives or emotions. Individuals who play these games have the chances of demonstrating aggressive motives and behavior towards others. Though some sources claim there's no correlation between the two, thanks to varied factors, the viewing of violence through video games negatively impacts one's motives, resulting in a lot of aggressive behavior. Personally, as a child, I was given technology when I was about in middle school, and since I am the oldest, I have younger siblings, and my brother was allowed to play video games when he was in elementary school, and he so easily had access to violent video games that he'd play with his friends, and my mom could tell that he was more aggressive, along with my sister, because she had learned from him, of what games that he played, so she played the same ones. And my mom said together, both of them were more aggressive than I was. Violent video games grew attention as people began to connect violent, aggressive motives in reality to the viewing or playing of these video games. A key feature in one's motivation is cognition. This is the area in which the viewing violence may show its impacts on an individual. Scientists Creech and Crutchfield emphasize the meaning of cognition as contributing to the direction of behavior. In order to see if one is cognitively learning when they play violent forms of video games, we look to studies of individuals' behaviors after they play a violent game. So some of the violent games that I knew that my brother played were Call of Duty, Mortal Kombat, and Grand Theft Auto, and these are only a few violent games, but there are so many more, and it was so easy for my brother to get access to these types of games. Grable, Kirch, and Esselman were the scientists who conducted this study. They chose random subjects to play either a non-violent or a violent video game. The results from this experiment supported a relationship between playing video games and children's aggression fantasies. The table from this experiment is pictured up above. This relation was proven when conducting this experiment because the individual's fantasies of performing viewed aggressive behavior increase as the time spent playing the video games increased. So in the very bottom right-hand corner, you can see, or in the last column where aggression is, the first total is 12.4% and then 9.8%, and the last one is 22.2%, and that just shows the increase of aggression when the time spent increased. Along with affecting individuals' motives, it also impacts their emotions towards certain things and other people around them. In order to test this, experimenters looked at one's views on subjects that had to do with violence after a violent video game was played. Rubrick, a researcher, looked into the link between playing violent video games and an individual's attitudes toward war, specifically using children ranging in ages of 10 to 15. The results showed the more the students played the games, the more favorable they felt towards war. Not only is it being seen that violent games are impacting one's behavioral motives, but is also impacting one's view on controversial topics and their overall outlook on life. Researchers Ballard and Weiss conducted their own experiment that tested the impacts that video games had on an individual's emotions and their level of hostility towards others. The experiment they created measures male participants' hostility after they played a more violent or regular version of a popular video game, Mortal Kombat. After the experiment, Ballard and Weiss found that male college students who played a more violent version scored higher on hostility measures and had higher blood pressure than those who played a less violent version. As participants' levels of violence increased, it was clear that their emotions were negatively impacted, but their health was also negatively impacted. When something like a video game is supposed to bring joy to an individual, it is not expected that it could ever cause harm to someone's health. Considering the fact that violent video games are doing worse rather than good, we need to recognize the negative aspects of playing these games. Recognizing these aspects will allow us to prevent issues before it is too late. It is very apparent that violent video games are affecting individuals' behaviors along with their emotions. The correlation between the aggressive motives and violent video games is apparent in the previous experiments. There is no experiment that will universally prove the impact of violent video games. One reason for this inability is because each experiment used different intensities of violence. Not each experiment had the same intensity. Going along with this variation, we might also consider the fact that everyone is different, which means everyone interprets violence differently. As I previously stated, every individual is different and unique, which makes it difficult to make one conclusion regarding how violent video games impact the population as a whole. Many factors should be considered before concluding the long-term consequences of playing video games that contain violence. Considering all of this, there are still several experiments that show correlation between aggressive behavior and motives after playing these games. With this information, allowing kids to play these violent games so often can cause high trait aggression. We should take it into account the effects that games have on individuals in order to guarantee that it doesn't make a negative toll on society as a whole.